Walked across an empty land. I knew the pathway like the back of my hand. I felt the earth beneath my feet. Sat by the river and it made me complete. I think of it, where have you gone? I'm getting old and now it's something to realize. So tell me when you're gonna let me in. I'm getting tired and I need somewhere to begin. I came across a fallen elm tree. I felt the branches I've been looking at me. Is this the place we used to love? Is this the place I can do now? I'm getting old and now it's something to realize. I walked across an empty land. I knew the pathway like the back of my hand. I felt the earth beneath my feet. Sat by the river and it made me complete. I think of it, where have you gone? I'm getting old and now it's something to realize. So tell me when you're gonna let me in. I'm getting tired and I need somewhere to begin. I came across a fallen elm tree. I felt the branches I've been looking at me. Is this the place we used to love? Is this the place I can do now? I walked across an empty land. I knew the pathway like the back of my hand. I felt the earth beneath my feet. Sat by the river and it made me complete. I think of it, where have you gone? I'm getting old and now it's something to realize. So tell me when you're gonna let me in. I'm getting tired and I need somewhere to begin. I came across a fallen elm tree. I felt the branches I've been looking at me. Is this the place we used to love? Is this the place I can do now? I'm getting old and now it's something to realize.
It felt like
You work hard, get good grades, go to college.
I want to go to college. I got good grades. I overachieved.
That's right, she did.
Debt is good.
Debt is so good.
So much debt. I can totally save up and buy a house and start a family. Oh,
Starting a family means you need 2 or 3 jobs.
you can't afford to buy. Oh,
You can't afford to rent. Used cars cost as much as the new ones.
oh.
It's weird. Good debt is
I
good.
was head of my class, so too expensive.
Work hard, get good.
Say something about
Rent is freaking insane.
breaking news. Everything is terrible.
Does it have to be this way?
What if it was different?
It's always been that way.
We've got to build our way out of it. Yeah.
Don't control that in the hands of the people, not the bureaucracy.
System readiness paperwork.
No waiting. No lines.
Permissionless.
Just because you're born into a system
Doesn't mean you have to live with it.
Man, they fucking nailed that. Just because you're born into a system doesn't mean you have to live with it. Coinbase nailed this commercial. And that's the truth. I think if we're 45 and younger, we just need a new system. We need a new roadmap for the American dream. The old American dream worked for so many people in the older generations, but for us younger generations and future generations, we have to change the way we think about college, home ownership, and just everything across the board. So let's work together. Let's have hope, and let's make a change.
Yeah, I agree.
It felt like
Probably just give her 5-6 more minutes. No. Your story is interesting. You there? We're having some technical difficulties. You in?
I'm in. How are you?
Not bad. And yourself?
I'm good. My son just came back. Came back from Europe, so I was just touching base with him. He was on vacation for a week.
Oh, fun. Wait, is he in school?
No, he's not in school.
Where does he work?
He works for FANUC. My son's 27, so he he already graduated and everything. He's an engineer, so he was taking some time off.
27, 1997 or 1996?
96.
Is he considered? So I'm going to ask you two weird questions to start out. First things first. All right, welcome today. I'm going to read your. Give me one moment. Let me just pull this up. All right, here it is. Okay, so welcome everybody today to Pick Your Brains podcast. First things first. Today I'm welcoming an author, another co-author who did volume 2 of Latinx and Social Work, and her name is Rosita. So we're going to have her tell her career story, and then I'm going to pull from the story a little bit because I actually had a chance to read it last night in my own busy life. But basically, I'm going to read from the thing you sent me. All right. Rosita Marinez has over 20 years of experience specializing in operations management, fiscal management, project management, program development, executive leadership. Her focus areas are mental health, substance use disorder, HIV, AIDS, and housing. She's a senior vice president for the Institute of Community Living, acronym ICL. She oversees the nation's most extensive OMH housing portfolio for supported housing, consisting of over 1,600 supported apartment beds. The housing portfolio includes the treatment apartment TAP, the permanent scattered sites for individuals with severe mental illness, SMI. She's dedicated her career to housing for the past 15 years. She's held senior leadership positions in well-known organizations focused on ending homelessness in New York City. Throughout her career, she's been part of different initiatives in housing, HIV, workforce development, the New York State AIDS Institute, positive housing and all housing retention programs, Robin Hood, AIDS for AIDS International, New York Immigrant Program, Robin Hood Seed Co. She also has a Master's of Science in Nonprofit Leadership from Fordham, Masters of the Silver, an MSW from the Silver School of Social Work. She also has a postgraduate degree in Advanced Clinical Social Work from Silberman and CFI from Columbia. She's a fellow of the George and Bell Strell Executive Leadership at Silberman. She holds multiple certifications in leadership, housing development, property management, and housing compliance. I'm going to have you touch on a little bit of these qualifications because for my own reference, that's a lot right there. Not just to be an executive and work for someone, but that's quite a lot to get. And I would imagine it got very pricey, but it's not a bad thing either.
Well, thank you, Benjamin, for having me at your podcast, Pick Your Brains. Happy to have great conversation in terms of background, different things that I've been doing, and what led me being into the social work profession, and just giving our audience a little bit more about myself, about social work, about being a co-author in volume 2 latienx book. So yeah.
So just so you're aware, there was two things we both agreed we were going to touch on, and we'll get to that throughout this. But so you're aware, the defined audience for this is going to be a combination of teachers, social workers like yourself, because eventually I'm going to probably be targeting some educational products, which I'm beginning to develop probably in January when I start to do this slowly over the next few years. But they're going to be in the form of not necessarily trainings, but chats and discussions, which will eventually lead to those type of products, because I think your field, correct me if I'm wrong, but the DSM, which you're quite familiar with, those were written by neurotypes. Am I correct? And I'm talking about basically undiagnosed or people who never lived with autism, for someone like yourself and many of your colleagues. Now, would you all definitely be willing to have trainings, or not even necessarily trainings, products that are done about autism by people like myself who have the experience of living with it? Do you think that would benefit?
So that's a lot, and then I'll answer your question. Then we'll go into speaking about a little bit about different things, including clinical. I am not a clinician. I don't practice clinical. I've been,
which is fine.
And it's a decision that I made a couple of years ago in terms of doing more macro social work. And so in terms of that area of the DSM, there's been so many debates about how it's evolved up until the most recent version. Would it be a good idea to involve people more with lived experience into the work? Absolutely. But then there's higher powers that are involved with the DSM-5 or wherever we are, TR, because it's hard to keep track, right, in terms of those areas. So that's a bigger conversation, Benjamin. And for me, like, yes, it's a form of guidance in terms of clinical, but it's not the all and do all of being guided by it. And that's my personal opinion on that.
See, the funny thing is, I think it would, from my mind, at least give you guys a better understanding of autism from somebody who actually lived with it. Because one thing, in your story, the thing that kind of connected with me the most, I'm not bringing this up because I want you to relive it. I'm bringing it up because I had actually much similar experience, and this is coming from a very affluently white community further up outside NYC. We're talking closer to Danbury, Connecticut. I loved the community that I grew up in. However, when I look at their progression versus my progression, I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of them, they don't understand autism as much as they would like to think they do, unless they have a family member or a friend with the lived experience. And they don't get it, because if we're looking at 20th century standards, supposedly I'm successful, which you could make one argument, but I'm successful with limited to low resources, whereas everyone my age probably significantly got a lot further. So I was actually bullied myself, but I was bullied because I didn't fit in. But it was based on a perceived clinical diagnosis for a learning disability, which in the 90s, guess what I was actually called? Mentally retarded. So your bullying obviously was different. So I'm not going to ask you to go into it as much, because that was the point of the story. But I will say we probably had similar we had similar circumstances. But I speak the native language in this country, and you spoke Spanish at home, but probably had to learn English outside. So that's what I'm guessing was probably part of it, correct?
No. So that's not actually the case. And I'm sorry that you went through the bullying aspect. And yes, I did get bullied growing up in the suburbs of New Jersey in a white town for being Latina or Black and brown. So a little bit of my history and context and overview. I was born in the United States. People get it confused just because you're a Latino or you look brown, that you're coming or migrating from another country, don't speak English or anything. Actually, a little bit about my background is my mom's from South America and my dad's Caribbean. And so my mom came to college to this country at age 18 to study here in the United States. And
which country in South America? I was trying to think.
So my mom is mixed. She's Peruvian and Argentinian. And I don't want to go to all the logistics of the background.
No, that's fine. It was...
but they both, I was born here, and I didn't really speak Spanish. That's the contrary to what people's perception believe or think, that because you're Latino, you speak Spanish. Actually, I had to learn Spanish, and appropriate Spanish, because at home we were speaking more in English than speaking Spanish. So when I actually was going into college, I took a Spanish test thinking, oh, well, I know Spanish. Well, I bombed that test and I had to take a whole year of Spanish. And even up until today, and this is my experience because my brothers had, they own their own experience. I don't speak Spanish the way that I would like to speak Spanish. I don't write and read Spanish to the degree that
you probably have to live in a Latin American country for some time. Yeah. And listen, I wasn't born with your language. Mm-hmm. I worked around it since my days at GNC in 2008. Mm-hmm. And the one I learned on was actually Dominican Spanish. And that one's probably one of the hardest ones to understand, just because of the fact that they speak it very fast.
Yeah, and can I just add to that, each country has their own way of speaking Espanol. And so for me, I had to learn Spanish than having to learn English. So it was the other way around. And I really think that a lot of individuals like myself, who are second generation, now you have third and fourth generation, they lose the Spanish language. They lose a lot of aspects of the Latino culture where they come from, because now you're born here, you're more Americanized, and you lose a lot of those things that your grandparents and your ancestors took pride in order to be more fitting into the American culture. And what is the American culture? But in saying what I'm saying with this is that, everybody identifies themselves how they feel in terms of their upbringing and feeling more comfortable in terms of their roots. So as a social worker, I've been a social worker for 20 years now. I was one of the very few Latinas being able to go to graduate school, being able to be part of a scholars program at Hunter, and being really able to give back to my community and be a social justice advocate and voice for those that lost the voice or been taking the voice and lacking of resources. So I'm a combination of many backgrounds, South American and Caribbean. At the end of the day, I always say that I identify as a Latina, born here in the United States, and I'm happy to be able to give back to my community and contribute to the social work field in whatever way I can. And in my chapter, when I discuss about my upbringing in a white suburban town in New Jersey and being Latina, I was picked on a lot. Yes, I was called the N-word. Yes, there was a lot of things that were not right. And we're talking about late 80s going into 90s, not that far, not so many years ago. And so it still exists. Racism is true, and it still exists. And it's something that I don't really take it as like, oh, poor Rosie, this is what happened to me. I actually turn that around and those experiences to be able to survive in the mainstream world in terms of many areas, especially in the workforce. So Yes, it wasn't a pleasant one, but at the same time, I don't really kind of like harbor things like that. I take things and make it into a better perspective in terms of how do I move on, and how can I, able to manifest myself as a person of color and being proud of it, and also navigating all the white supremacy that goes around in this world.
I have a better way to describe white supremacy. I said it back at the author signing for volumes 1 and 2 to you and everybody else. I wouldn't be able to run around my old community saying that word. So the word I like, the way I like to put this, and I was just saying it to my mom, is the path of least resistance in a white community. And somebody who came onto my podcast last year, who worked for the company that I work for right now, she's a career coach. Her name was Catherine Fasanella. She climbed all the way to the top as a white woman, as a healthcare executive. I made a post about this probably earlier in the week, and then she made something interesting because this was a Thanksgiving reflection, and it was related to some of my old friends. I love them to death, but she said, how many of those people do you think are actually happy at this stage in their life? Because really what they did is they followed the path that was laid out for them by their parents and grandparents. At a school like John Jay Cross River, which is where I don't know what in New Jersey, what when you were growing up, what your parents needed income wise to raise you, but where I lived, both parents literally needed to be making 6 figures or higher just to afford living up in Cross River, Katona Lewisboro district, which is one of the top 25 districts in the United States. So most of these kids are being raised by doctors, lawyers, executives, Wall Street, finance people, meaning their parents are setting an expectation for them that you're going to go to college, you're going to get your job out of high school. And by the way, most of my friends got their jobs through their family members. Benjamin did not. Benjamin, in fact, ended up pigeonholed to retail for a very long time. And also, similar to you and many of your colleagues, I've had to deal with different levels of mental health and autism issues over the years. I haven't gotten to where I would like to in my own career, and I looked at your story and what you've been able to do. And if I could have had not luck like that, where one person took a chance on me in a field and didn't see, oh, you have autism. What's autism? An invisible disability, which is only really, Erica told me she had ADHD. Nobody knows what ADHD is except for the fact that we don't learn the same way as a neurotypical learner. I'm sure you know that as well, right?
Yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about this. People always think that a disability needs to be physically seen. That's not the case. There's a lot of what I call invisible disabilities that are not seen, and we need to be sensitive towards disabilities in general. And so, yeah, I mean, like what you're saying about like background and things like that. Everybody has a history and background in terms of their upbringing and what led them to who they are today. I really think that the typical American in the
You
United
mean
States,
the typical Irish or Englishman? Because I literally watched a video on Instagram the other day, and it was talking about American white people. Those are literally United Kingdom. So basically Irish English background.
well, when I say a typical American, meaning living in America, because this country, was founded on different things, so that's a whole different other conversation.
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
so I would say the typical person living in America, being an American, goes through what you just mentioned. We all have to like work ourselves in life. Every family's background is different. Not every family is privileged or has the same social economic status or education. And so if we talk about the majority of individuals in school, they're getting loans, right? They don't have mommy and daddy who are top executives, billionaires, millionaires, and all this to pay for college and go to Ivy League schools. They're really going to community colleges. They're taking out loans, and they're paying for their education and then coming out with hundreds of thousands of loans. I have many friends that take loans, and it's like $200,000 and $300,000, and I'm just like, wow, this is outrageous. So our education,
I'm 72,000 in the hole, and I had no way of paying it because, unfortunately, that invisible disability, everyone is. I don't know how to nicely say this, so I really can't. Look at the president of the United States, who's 80 years old. This is the mindset that we're looking at with people with disabilities. We're not looking at people with disabilities like myself as capable of performing more than a retail job, to which I give my finger to the oldest generation, but basically saying, hey guys, you have people below 50 and below, you have below 40, you have below 20 whose needs are not being met right now, who want age reflective leaders with 21st century ideas, not 20th century ideas. 21st century ideas would mean, especially for what you deal with housing, is people would realistically be able to have a reasonable apartment to be able to rent. Where are we coming up with and if you don't mind me asking this, are your parents baby boomers or above baby boomers? Baby boomers are 1946 to 1964.
So my parents are baby boomers, but going back to the housing piece and things like that, because we kind of, yes, in terms of education, and unfortunately, how individual students, and like you just mentioned, people being in debt and having to be in debt for a long period of time. In terms of housing, I mean, affordable housing is needed. I've been doing housing for 15 years, and in New York City, in the different levels of housing, and especially when COVID hit, and now that we're slowly coming out of COVID, housing prices have skyrocketed. So the housing market, it's like everybody's in a competition, in terms of like rents and things like that. And so the average New Yorker who works 2 and 3 jobs is really struggling, unfortunately, to pay rent. And so the rents are unaffordable, the salaries aren't going any high. And so a lot of people find themselves in situations of having to pay more than 30% of their income, even 50% of their income, or 60% of their income, to be housed, and even debating whether or not to pay the rent or have food on the table. And I read this in a website of an organization that almost 60,000 children and families who are working are living in the shelter system. And it's very sad to hear that children and families who can't pay rent, who are working 2 and 3 jobs, are finding themselves being in a shelter system because they can't afford rent, and debating whether or not.
You're talking about my generation, millennials, 1981 to 1996. Half of us can't even afford to become first-time home buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Let alone in the city like what you're talking about with millennials, where nobody can afford rent. Meaning, unfortunately, a large majority of the generation, I'm reading a lot of these articles myself, they have to move south. Now, what happens when they move south? Now there's a demand for housing in Texas. Texas just became, literally like Florida, 2 of the most expensive southern states to live in, which everyone bragged for 20 years were about literally 20 years were the more affordable places to live. Yeah. And I call BS on Texas, because if everything is a 30-minute drive from the city of Austin to Georgetown, where I was for my sister's wedding last year, then that's not really an affordable state, because my brother just left with his girlfriend, who's from Texas, originally from Queens. They now live in Astoria from Texas. He said himself, you actually spent the same amount of money relative to living in New York, but you had to gas up your car every 1 to 2 days just to be able to keep it going in the state of Texas, since everything is a 30-minute drive. So geographically, Texas may be an affordable state from a housing perspective, but with everything else, it can be just as expensive.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing this up because it's not only in New York. I mean, we say more of the East Coast in New York because it's a city, and you get all this media and everything going on. But this is a national crisis in terms of unaffordable housing throughout the United States. You just mentioned Texas. Another state is Florida. So it's a national crisis in terms of unaffordable housing, and it's impacting our generation, and if it's not addressed with concrete real solutions that are effective, it's going to actually also impact our future generations, our kids, because it's a generational effect. So it's not only New York City, it's not only the tri-state area. This is a national crisis throughout all 50 states.
You have a reasonable. Yeah, no, finish. I was about to make a point to you about something, and I'll just put it in there. You probably have about, I'm going to say 70% of millennials who are not even married right now and can't even start a family, and that's because nobody's getting proper wages. Now, I don't know, are you considered a Gen Xer, which it was 1965 to 1980?
Well, I'm in between the crust. I'm in between the crust between millennials and the crust meaning between Gen X and millennials. But
that would be like anywhere, but that would be that sub generation, which I probably am a part of.
So it's a sub-generation of the sandwich generation, but it impacts us, the housing aspect. It also,
I was born in 85 to answer your question. So I never really considered myself an actual millennial because I'll give you a funny example. The two main authors in volume 1, we went out for my birthday back in, what was it? Yeah, September, end of September. So when I just turned 38, we were talking about this. I got off the phone with them for the first time and finally remember what it was like to not have phones when you were growing up as a kid and actually in the 90s be able to play outside.
That was a good feeling. I totally remember that. Nowadays, unfortunately, kids are glued to the phone and the iPads and get absorbed with the whole social media and internet. So being able to,
I'm gonna make here's how an older millennial and Gen Xer would look at social media. Social media is a tool. Social media is supposed to be used for connecting. If you want to build a business, there's nothing wrong with it. Like I'm building a podcast. The only reason, and I got made fun of for this by my best friend who just got married this year, to which I finally said to him afterwards in a very subtly nice way, I don't live with my original community there, buddy. So it's either I go to networking events, which has a 50-50 chance of actually being able to connect with the right people, or I do it on social media and with a podcast. And then number 3. And unfortunately, you don't know what that's like because you stayed in one place your entire life. Daddy got you your job. And what's Benjamin supposed to do in this situation? Like when I came to your guys' event, and with old friends, I'm not even going to go much into this, but what I am going to say is Madeline and Erica and yourself and everyone understand how to give back to your friends because you all had challenges in your life. What I don't need at this stage in my life is for people to just throw money at me and think that I want to spend time with them because they can cover drinks. I want people to do what Madeline did, which is take me to a room full of opportunity so that I can better my life. This is what we're supposed to be doing for our friends, not just basically when we don't have time. Oh yeah, you want to go out for a couple drinks? That doesn't do anything. That really doesn't do anything. That doesn't make my situation better. Listening to me would make the situation better. If, for example, I say I'm not happy with where I am and I'm doing something about it, I expect you to listen. Not you, we're talking about people who have listening problems because I think that's another huge problem that social media has really done a number on everyone today. And you can see it more on social media. Nobody listens to one another.
Yeah, that's a point you're bringing there. And now that you're talking about that, listening is super important because we always want to talk, and not listen to real listening. Because you can listen to someone, but not really listening to the words and context they're trying to say. And what you're saying here is that listening is super important and carefully listening and being supportive for one another. Yeah, like you know, you have friends, you go out and things like that, but the support is necessary in terms of everything that we do. And as human beings, we need to support each other in terms of everything that's going on nowadays, and really being able to be there for each other, because that kind of like sense of humanity in many situations in this world kind of gets lost in translation. But yeah, it's something that support is really necessary. And I'm glad that you've been able to find that support. And yes, the last event where I met you and you were there, and being able to come in community, share resources, be able to express yourself and support each other is really important. And as a social worker, support is necessary in everything that we do with our clients. You know, our clients, the clients that I have serviced over my career, you know, providing a support, providing them guidance, being there in terms of being an advocate, having them make their own choices, and for them to be the drivers of their life is super important. And throughout the years, you know, I realized that my work as a social worker not only impacts the micro, but also the whole macro level in terms of everything that we do.
Did you take economics courses when you were going through college as well to gain an understanding of economics? Because unfortunately, I noticed something else, even among my old friends. They don't understand basic concept of economics. For example, I noticed with some of the places you worked, like ICL, which I believe the bigger focus of that business model would be mental health and housing support. A lot of people, I think, miss this one huge understanding with business because they take the media understanding of it. In a for-profit company, I learned in Economics 101, why do businesses exist? They exist to make money, or they exist to create a product or a service that they believe will benefit people. Whereas a nonprofit organization or a mental health clinic runs a lot differently. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So it's interesting you say that, because nonprofit worlds and for-profit, yeah, for-profit is about gaining profit, and then, you know, selling a merchandise. It could be like Google, it could be Instagram, it could be
Financial
Apple,
product.
anything, a financial product, a service. And nonprofit, it's a service being provided to the clients that the organization is focused. So in the different organizations that I worked, and I would say more predominantly past 15 years, mental health and housing, we service individuals with mental health and housing, and a nonprofit doesn't run, you know, gets money through federal, state, and city contracts, and some grants and philanthropy and fundraising that comes with it.
So you do you get corporate donations?
So every organization is different, and I don't want to say one over the other. I would say in general, in the nonprofit world, there are corporations that do sponsor organizations depending on what the company feels that they want to support. And so I'm just going to say, like the Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation, huge car company, they specifically, you know, provide funds to the areas of their interest. Robin Hood Foundation, which is a huge organization.
You worked at Robin Hood Foundation, right?
No, I didn't work at Robin Hood Foundation. I had we had at the different organizations that I worked over a period of time, they had grants from the Robin Hood Foundation. So the Robin Hood Foundation provides a lot of grants to a lot of nonprofits in HIV and housing and workforce development and children and families. And then as a nonprofit, you apply for specific grants for X amount of dollars in order to fund the program. So it's always looking into grants, it's looking into RFPs, requests for proposals. State like OMH has proposals going out with specific services. or programs that they want to roll out in the community.
You're talking to me in operations management, correct? Which was one of the areas that you specialize in?
Correct. So this is grant and grant writing, RFPs, and really looking
That's
at
actually something I want to pick up, believe it or not, because I'm very good with data. And actually, I just found a website through someone this year that I haven't had a chance to look at, but I'm going to start doing it a little more in the new year. But grant management was one of the areas. Now, if I am correct, I've seen this before, but I was discouraged from it. But what can you do more things that are on the business side with a social work background? For example, I had Damari Bonilla on the show last year, and she actually worked for a lobbying firm, you know, with her social work background. Because I know mainly the larger amount of jobs in the 2000s that a social worker could do were mainly, unfortunately, like social service worker, working at or clinical, I think were the main draws. But then I found out recently you could go into lobbying, grant writing, grant management was another area. And then there was also public policy analyst. Although I would think a business background is better for that.
So there's a couple of things with the social work and the beauty, I call it the beauty of social work. It's not only direct practice and clinical. You could do so many things. You could be a grant writer. You could be working in policy and government. You can work in corporate. You can work in tech. You can work in so many areas. It's not only for-profit, nonprofit, social services, but also for-profit organizations. And so it really depends where the person sees themselves in terms of where they want to go in their career and finding their niche. My niche is not the same as other individuals out there. But it's really finding what you really enjoy and love. And for me, my passion really is housing and mental health and healthcare, because those are really crucial, basic human beings. Like housing is a human right. Everybody should have a home. It's not like you're entitled to a home, or
real estate developers do not believe housing is a right. Real estate agents don't believe it's a right. And banks don't believe it's a right, just the same as health insurance companies don't believe healthcare is a right. But see, I would disagree with that. Same with education. I see these as rights. I don't see these like with health insurance or even therapy as trying to sell a luxury product. These are services. These are services that are supposed to help human beings, not something to let a few wealthy individuals profit off of. But apparently you and I may agree with that, but not everyone sees the same thing.
So basic human needs are what? Shelter, right? You need
You're
shelter.
going into Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Yeah, I actually took sociology and then I did a post on this, and Madeline and I discussed it at one point. So yes, food, shelter,
clothing.
Those are the three most basic needs.
Yeah.
Education is a need, but I think we're starting to see with the student loans that college might not be the best path for everyone, unfortunately. For you and many of your colleagues, yes, it was because of the field. But for somebody like me, the problem for me is I can't follow a traditional path anymore. Look at the fact that I'm doing this right now with you and many other people. What does this tell you? This tells you, unfortunately, if I want other things, the traditional path that that worked for my mother and father, that worked for your mother and father, won't work for me. I have to get creative if there are things that I want. And that's something that I believe some people like myself should have been encouraged to do at a young age, not go chase what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. And in terms of what you were mentioning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yes, we need housing, we need shelter, food, and clothing, and also other needs are healthcare to take care of yourself, and education, but education may not be for everybody. And and traditional education nowadays is changing. But in terms of like having a home should not be a luxury. Having an apartment, having a place to lay your head at night, having a place where you can have dinner with your family should not be a privilege. Should not be a privilege, especially in the United States, where, we are a country that are based on so many things and strength in terms of our economy. And the reality is that many people don't have a safe space to lay their head every night, or don't have a home where they can have dinner.
No, because these things that you and I talk about are called radical socialism. I'm being sarcastic with this because I'm basically hiding the fact that and I love our parents, but their generation and right above is completely delusional to believe that these are things that should be treated as luxury products. They're not. I think what we're talking about, which is, I think if I look at capitalism in the United States, which has completely been bastardized at this point, this isn't, this isn't the theorized capitalism that Adam Smith spoke about in theory when he wrote Wealth of Nations. But unfortunately, certain people kind of siege the idea and control it more at the top. That's a completely separate panel discussion, but that sort of gives you an idea, because things you and I are talking about are not actually radical privileges. They're a necessity. So we're talking now, if I asked you to put yourself on the political spectrum is basically, we start at the end with things that you and I are talking about, which is supposedly you and I are very far lefty, or liberal. And since in your story, you mentioned you came from a traditionally conservative family, where do you put yourself? Do you put yourself more on the progressive, more updated value? Do you put yourself moderately? Do you put yourself as a liberal? Do you put yourself as conservative? Or do you put yourself on like literally defending capitalism, which is a completely broken system? So I'm referring to right wing or far right.
So that's a good question, because I tend to not go into politics.
We're not discussing actual public policy related politics. What we're discussing is belief system, or what we would prefer. Maybe if I put it like that, it would be easier to answer that.
So as you mentioned, yes, and you read my chapter. Yes, I grew up in a very Christian conservative household. And I'm grateful for the many aspects that it came with it, but I also, growing up and finding myself as I was, developing as a teenager to a young adult to then being an adult, there's certain things that I still do value and keep, and there's other things that, I'm like, well, this isn't something that I really, support, and things like that. I find myself being more a progressive person in terms of those areas. But, again, everybody's belief system and how they see the world is different than you and I. And we need to respect people's opinions.
That's why when I bring up the political spectrum, you're the second one I've done this with. Because I had a guest in September. I had 3 guests in September. He's a consultant, but he spent 15 years as an NYPD officer, and now he's more of like a moderately conservative due to the police background, but he sees through a lot of the BS that's, really old school, outdated beliefs today. Like, for example, let's circle back on housing. Circle back on housing. That's not meant to be a privilege. That's not us being progressive. That's us saying, no, this is actually very needed.
Correct.
I shouldn't have to pay 33% of my income to somebody who effectively doesn't have an actual career, but is just a BS salesperson. I mean, if we want to define that as socialism because somebody's wealth is in, owning private housing, then I suppose he can set the rate, but it doesn't mean it's right.
And while going into more beyond than housing, mental health should not be a privilege, meaning that if you don't have insurance, right, that covers, and insurance has all the restrictions.
$50 out of pocket.
You got to pay out of pocket, right? So let's say about paying out of pocket.
That's why I stopped. I was seeing a therapist. She couldn't bill my MVP insurance. So at the clinic, mine used, I had to pay out of pocket $60. Now add this up 4 times a month. How much money is that?
You're talking about $240.
Bi-weekly, $120. I'm making $20.74 an hour. And I'm being polite about this. We need to stop telling people in this country what we think they need and act like they have emergency savings for this type of stuff. And we need to go to a place where there should be clinics that just offer it for free.
So in terms of what you're saying, mental health.
Well, maybe not free, but maybe like a reasonable $20 cost, not adjusting it to your income.
So low cost. So right there, in terms of, you shared your experience, which I appreciate, is that like if you don't have health insurance, you're basically paying out of pocket. And even if you do have health insurance, you still have co-pays, right? So like I'm going to give my example. I have health insurance. I get deducted bi-weekly through my employer. Then I do have co-payments, and then they limit you to how many sessions per year. For those that don't have insurance, or they feel comfortable with one therapist and they may not accept, that's another thing, not all therapists or clinicians accept all health insurance. And if you feel comfortable with one person, and then you would have to pay out of pocket. How much is out of pocket? Low end could be $125 to high end being $375. And so is there anything that's reasonable for an individual or families and children that can't pay these high amounts based on a sliding scale, or even very, very low cost of a $20, just showing out of good faith, in order for people to receive mental health services? Because it is unaffordable for many for many individuals, especially Black and brown communities. And then when there's stigma attached to mental health, then it becomes also an extra layer of it.
You also got to remember one thing, because you grew up in the same type of community I did. Not every white person has the same situation, and you're on a podcast with someone who doesn't have the same situation as his peers. And 3 things: they don't want to hear it, but you and your own community don't seem to be a little more accepting of it. Honestly, if I had to look at my entire career progression of being stuck in retail, within the last 2 to 3 years, especially after watching 2 weddings, I've been manically depressed half the time. I've been not happy with where I am. My best friend barely wants to hear it after getting married. I get it. It's not convenient because you don't have experience with it, but this is where you just need to be a truly supportive friend and listen. That's all I need you to do right now. I don't need you to try to solve my problem. This is what I don't need from old friends. You gotta learn to listen sometimes. If somebody is feeling manically depressed, he doesn't want to go see a therapist, he wants to talk to his friends about it. And it's funny, I tagged you on another post. Do you remember the Rocky series?
Oh, yeah. The 80s Rocky.
The 2006 movie, Rocky Balboa.
Well, there have been so many. And I kind of like...
Rocky Balboa was the final one of his series with that character, because they did Creed, where they focused on Apollo Creed's son. But we're not talking about that one. I just posted up the It Ain't Sunshines and Rainbows monologue. In 2006, I was working at the Mount Kisco movie theater. A year and a half later, I ended up leaving that job because I had reached a growth in that. But separate from that, I got to see that movie for free. And that monologue didn't make sense to me in 2006. Give me 15 years to 18 years later. Now it makes sense. It makes a lot more sense looking back on it, because it's like, life, unfortunately, isn't the same for everyone. And I get what he was saying to his son, because his son was complaining about how the famous last name got him a comfortable job. Whereas somebody like me, I don't have a famous last name. I don't have friends and family who could recommend me. In fact, half of this podcast with meeting you and your community, I would say many of you are probably in much better positions if I were to want to do something with one of your, several different agencies or individual businesses where I might actually get recognized and selected for an opportunity, or, there's the ability for me to market for all of you because I'm skilled with that. But that's my point. The point is because I don't have, the type of network that can just find me opportunities. I have to go build it.
Yeah, and I hear and understand where you're coming from is in terms of how do you build community? How do you build community and find the right community for you, and be able to have a community that will support one's journey. And so it's hard.
And also access opportunities, build a better life, things that, are very challenging nowadays. You have social media for that, but unfortunately, social media is kind of, I want to say, dumpster fire to buyer beware, because not everyone is out for the right reasons, like with the LinkedIn platform, for example. I'm just going to leave it at that. There are good people on LinkedIn, but, people like yourself take some time to find. Through that platform, because a lot of people are just way too salesy. But that's more of a debate for my other podcast, Opinionated Collective, for like business topics. Like I said, completely separate topic. And you can find good people on social media, but it takes a while.
Yeah, and beyond social media, because we get wrapped up in social media. Look, I love social media of meeting.
It's amusing to me. It's allowed me to structure a podcast. Look at the fact when I started the project versus where I am right now. It's a lot because I can watch a lot of these content creators who are like a crap ton younger than me, act like they know everything, and guess what? Half of us are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and what I was trying to say before is that social media has its good aspects of it. You can build community there, you could build networking, you could get resources and things like that. But that also comes other aspects in play that it may not also be conducive all the time. I really think out of all of this and having this great conversation is how do we listen more to each other than talking, real listening, and then how do we support each other in building community with the Latinx collective, group of social workers that I've met, the past year or 2 years, better yet, that we know people in common. It's interesting that we're all, as human beings, we're all interconnected to someone else. So we know people that in common or went to school or worked in certain areas, that we may have come across their path, but we're all interconnected, and being able as a community to work together and being able to impact future generations. Myself as a social work leader is be able to create and support our future generation of leaders, because I know I'm not going to be here forever, right? And so passing, like they call passing the baton to the future generation of social workers is super important. And it's something that we do that through, being able to be mentors, being able to be coached, being able to be there for the younger generations. Because I know when I was a student, I would have loved to have all the support systems as a social worker that now than compared to before.
I have something that I wanted to comment on that, but first, I think I'm pulling from your story, by the way. So Latin women and men are like 12% of what social work actually is. And if I'm correct, 80% of that field is sadly, unfortunately, still a very white-dominated field.
Correct.
Well, there's a reason for that. It's because if you go back to Gen X, baby boomers, and silent generation, who's now the oldest senior generation, sadly, unfortunately, if you looked at wages and how that industry was designed, it was really for white women. It was really for white women, just like teaching profession, to be a secondary income while the husband made more money. But now, unfortunately, the and I just saw this on Instagram. There's a mortgage broker creator. I forgot the guy's name, but he was just talking about how basically, as not just as leaders in your case, in my case, and your community's case, but we have to redefine the American dream, because the old American dream is basically dead.
Mm. Oh, wow.
Especially when you have a whole generation who can't buy their first house unless they're basically married. And guess what? Not every millennial is going to be able to get married.
Yeah. And not everybody, just to add to that's the whole thing with society, is that there's expectations in regard to, oh, are you going to get married at a certain age? Are you going to have kids? You know, all these type of things of milestone that society expect. The reality is that marriage isn't for everybody, number one. Number two, you know, not everybody's ready to take responsibilities for a house and so many things, that their expectation is, oh, by 30 you need to get married, by 35 you got to have a kid, by 40 you got to be set in life. That's not really realistic, because that puts actually extra pressure on people, on individuals, when they don't meet the milestones and then think it's a failure. People, I know, like, I wasn't ready at a certain period of my time to actually buy a house. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready financially.
I'm ready now, but guess what?
Sure.
I'm not. Guess what? I'm not paid. Benjamin is not paid properly right now, because unfortunately there's a little problem with autism. They only think I can do customer service. And as you and everybody else can see, I'm capable of so much more. But because we still have our parents' generation, not all of whom are able to retire or want to retire, it puts a lot of annoying pressure on me to now forget pressure. I got done with my bachelor's degree at 34, right before COVID.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get I've been stuck in customer service for up to 20 years, which now includes working at a medical group, but they will only let me do scheduling, which I absolutely hate.
Mm.
I'm not going to go much into it, but I'm going to leave it at this, which is why I detest it and why I would want to, you know, potentially work in things like you get to do, whereas being an advocate, because at least I can get my voice heard, where I don't have to listen to somebody cry on the phone over why they can't see a doctor. And forget the fact that I make $20 an hour in what I do. I wake up Monday through Friday no longer looking forward to this, because I know I'm going to get screamed at for why patient can't access doctor, why hasn't nurse called me back, pharmacy is giving me issue with prescription, and I'm like, I'm hitting my brains out every day listening to this. I'm like, and you want to know why my mental health deteriorated within the last 2 years? Because I'm listening to people basically cry on the telephone who need to be seeing a mental health counselor or a therapist, not thinking that the doctor is going to solve your injury. It's not an injury. It's you have other traumas in your life that you just don't want to talk about freely with a therapist or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's hard. And like I mentioned, there, and you said this, like the pressure in society and things like that. I say this. I know I've had my own pressures, and I was going to say I wasn't ready to buy a house at a certain age, maturity, financially, and things like that. I did it, which I'm glad, but that comes with a lot of responsibilities, not only purchasing a house, maintaining your house and things like that, and not losing your house. I really, this is my opinion. People are ready when they're ready. People are ready when they're ready to get married. People are ready to buy a house, to go to college. It's a lot of things. It's not only financial, yes, financially, but also emotionally, and being mature to go through those steps. And we sometimes see it as, oh, I have to get this done because that's what society or my family expects. At the end of the day, I always say you need to be happy with the decision makings that you take in your life. No one should be dictating what is best for you. And being the driver of your own life is super important than everything else around the world. Because what works for me may not work for you, right? And may not work for someone else. So I'm really glad that we're having these real, like, conversations
Well,
because
I can have these conversations with you because you're open-minded, and it's kind of sad that with my old friends, I have to put together something like this just to get them to listen to me, and for however long this recording goes, or just in general, because they don't want to spend 5 to 10 minutes listening to me. And this isn't complaining. This is basically saying I basically have to jump through hoops with people with an older group of people, and it's like, why am I still friends with you at this point? And sometimes I probably think, along with some of the other stories that I've looked at in volume 1 or 2, and now I finally understand this because Madeline sent me a great episode last weekend. Are you familiar with Stephen Bartlett, the podcaster in the UK who's about age 30?
No.
He interviewed a woman in my age group whose name is Cody Sanchez. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but and there's another. Check out these 2 channels after today. Check out Nomad Capitalist, Andrew Henderson, and also check out Cody Sanchez's channel. They're what we call contrarians. Contrarian is basically defined as somebody who goes his own way or does what the opposite of what everyone wants him to do. So what was interesting about the both of them is she went the same route you and I went consecutively to a degree, where she worked in traditional finance and then one day finally just said, I'm done with this. I want to basically take what I'm doing, invest in, baby boomer businesses. And then she kind of ran with this in a media broadcasting company. And now, she does like master classes and educates people on, ways that you can find to alternatively invest, because, not everyone wants to gamble with the stock market. Like the stock market is a huge risk. Like I would love to buy a laundry, because because it gives high cash flow. It's just like, mental health and housing organizations, everyone needs a laundromat.
I'm going to check out Cody Sanchez's podcast. But yeah,
Stephen Bartlett interviewed her, and the one thing that she said that stuck with me from that, and that Madeline reinforced to me during the week, and she's right. You can't tell friends all your plans because they'll just sit there and laugh at you. I mean, it's not just sitting with you and her and questioning this. I've been thinking about this one for a while, and sometimes I say to myself, why am I still doing this when I'm reading books like this? I have a collection of books that I've purchased through people on LinkedIn that I've all started reading different authors because I myself want to write a book, about my life experiences. And I'm finally starting to wake up. I've read Robert Kiyosaka's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and even that resonated with me. You're right about one thing. We needed mentors when we were consecutively growing up, but we didn't have that. You give kids today are a lot more spoiled. They get mentoring.
For those, So just to add to that, and again, mentoring, it can be, I know it is expensive in terms of getting mentorship and coaching and things like that. Not everybody has the resources and networks to get coaching and mentoring and things like that. If you actually have the privilege and opportunity, hey, I always say take that opportunity. If someone's willing to invest with you that truly sees the potential in the person without having to do the financial aspect. But the reality is that comes with costs. And so
that's the whole thing, especially with LinkedIn. And I was just having this discussion with one of my past podcast guests last year, who's a video coach. She thinks spending money on a program from one of these coaches on LinkedIn is a good investment. Whereas me saying I'd rather go back to my alma mater right now because money is extremely tight. Well, guess what? Even the director of professional development and student services said to me, I've had these kids who pay thousands of dollars to have somebody write their resume and coach them wind up coming back to us anyway at university or small college career services department because they didn't get what they needed.
Mhm.
So that's the other side of coaching that you just hit on.
Yeah.
This is the problem.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a career coach, you should really question, do I want to do this before you start charging for that service? Because if all the advice that career coaches gives is effectively the exact same thing that I hear from my career services department, even though I have student loan debt, hey, guess what? My tuition paid for that service. Why would I go pay $750 to $1,500 to $2,000 for some program that, quite frankly, when I have less of an interest of trying to apply at this point, because when I can do something like this and talk to somebody like you and build a relationship, it's more beneficial than going through a whole coaching program, trying to find a recruiter on LinkedIn who isn't even going to answer, or figure out, hey, how can I meet this hiring manager? It's like, this is more beneficial because of your status as a senior VP. We're talking, we know one another. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
So
a difference between money and time that most
Yeah.
people don't get.
So yeah, there's a couple of things here before we wrap up. One is that you got to find the right fit, meaning the right person. There's a lot. There's a lot of things that go into into coaching and mentoring. You have to find the right person, and that comes with areas of interest, right? Also in terms of personality, and also time and everything else. I might not be a good fit for someone else, but I might be a good fit, let's say, for like someone else. So I didn't mean to be redundant on that. So with saying that is you got to find the right fit for you. Yes, it comes with money, but it shouldn't be something that is unaffordable in terms of thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars per session. There's a lot of things, and I say this myself when I started earlier in my career as a social worker. I did a lot of stuff looking online and talking to people and networking and getting feedback from those who were in the profession for a long time and asking questions to
Speaking of
my
networking,
professors.
what's your actual definition of networking? Because honestly, just between you and me, as you're discussing it, everyone, how networking is sold on LinkedIn is basically making a comment on a creator's post or DMing a recruiter or a hiring manager. I don't see that as networking. I don't see networking as going to DM and then trying to sell a product. What we're doing, this is networking. This is what it's actually supposed to be.
So there's a difference, and you're absolutely right. And I read this actually a post, actually on LinkedIn, and I actually took that post and did and posted it on my IG account. Is that networking is just about being in a setting where there's different people from different backgrounds. They talk to each other, they schmooze, they give business cards, right? The real connection is what counts at the end of the day. You connecting with someone after going to a networking event or connecting with someone via social media and building a relationship, it is what really counts. I could network with 100 people in an event. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have a true, real connection and relationship. And something that a mentor of mine said to me at Fordham, who's a big CEO in the nonprofit world, told me, Rosita, what relationships are super important. And he would say this always in our lab class. Relationships take you a very long way. And when I was at different events that he invited me, very nice big events and galas, I saw what he was talking about. He was preaching what he was doing. His relationship with a lot of individuals is what helped him and the organization especially to be able to build more resources and things like that. And so I'm a strong believer that yes, relationships do work, connecting with people do work, and people will always remember who you are, and that connection compare what are you getting out of. If I meet you, for example, and the first thing you say to me, it's like, oh, Rosita, I need a job. I'm just going to be like, okay, this is very straightforward, that this is a transactional relationship, that you need something from me, right?
See, you want to know something funny? When I came to your event, what was I not doing? I wasn't in the room to basically say to all of you, hey, I need a job. I'm like, oh, let's have fun tonight. Let's meet people. This will be more fun than trying to say, oh, you're an executive vice president or you're at the top of an organization. Can you please give me a job? Quite frankly, I don't even want to be throwing in applications anymore, because as me and my CTO talk about this every day, getting a job is based on what corporate wants, not what me and him want, or, out of a job. I'm literally at a point now where entrepreneurship or being an author is more something I want to do. That's a different type of network. That doesn't mean that I'm still looking for other opportunities that might be, in career form, sure, but it's less of a priority for me. And it's even though I went back to work with the director of student services, we're just fine tuning my resume. I can't spend 100 hours a month applying because I have a full-time job. Guess what else my other full-time job is? This podcast.
So yeah, and again, true relationships true relationships and connections get you a long way. And it's more than just paying a service or whatever it is. It's really
I go to a young group of people called the Westchester Young Professionals. This guy who graduated from my college on LinkedIn wanted to start doing in-person networking again. So we meet bi-weekly. I'm comfortable with that group of people, even though they're, and we're all different ages, just like you and I are different ages. But, you're right. That's where relationship building comes in.
Yeah. So to end on that note, because we're going a little bit over time, is I want to say thank you so much. This is really great conversation, Benjamin.
You're welcome.
We touched on different things from background to education, student loans, to housing, to mental health. Thank you for sharing in terms of your disability and your interests. Talking about buying a home and everything. I just want to let just some final words for our audience is that one is that always be true to yourself. Be your authentic self, be true to yourself. Two, it's like, we all have many differences and come from different opinions and background. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we need to be kind to each other, and we need to be able to uplift each other. Three is that as this world is going through a lot of stuff, kindness is a key point in everything that we do. Being kind to each other is a necessary aspect in order to create and continue humanity. And with that, I say everything.
All right. Thank you for coming by. And when I restart panel discussion, Opinionated Collective next year, I'll give you a heads up on topics for social work and housing, and we'll talk about that, because that's gonna, because I'm putting together a roster of people to come do panel discussion next. All right.
Okay, Benjamin. Thank you. Great convo.
You too. All right. Bye.
Bye.